Okay, right. Uh, okay. Hi. I am here with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin. She does not use a hyphen.
And I'm here with my sister, Tracie Guy Decker. She does use a hyphen. And together we are doing Lightbringers, where we illuminate the deeper meaning of the crime-solving devil TV show. And yes, we're overthinking it.
Yeah, we are. It's true. Today we're going to talk about episodes 108 and 109, titles of which are Et tu, Doctor, and A Priest
walks into the bar.
Yeah. So these are two really good episodes. I think The Priest Walks into a Bar is maybe one of the best episodes of the whole series.
Yeah, it's definitely the best of this season.
Yeah.
And one of the best in the series, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So you see where we're going to land on this one. There's a little spoiler. So let's start with Et tu, Doctor, though. One of the things that, I mean, I think we've seen Lucifer kind of project his feelings onto the cases before, but this one, like, more so, I think, than others.
Yes.
This was one of the first where we saw just so plainly how things that were playing out in the case were reflecting back to him what was going on in his life.
So that kind of underscores the fact that Lucifer really isn't very emotionally intelligent. He's lived for millennia and he has never before experienced jealousy. And why would he have? He is the devil. Like he actually says that the devil doesn't get jealous because anything that he's ever wanted, he could take, with the exception of the rebellion. That's the only thing he's ever wanted and tried for and didn't get. But even then, there wasn't a sense of jealousy. It was, had more to do with power dynamics than wanting something he couldn't have. So it's understandable that he would have this outsized reaction to the case that is all about jealousy. On multiple angles. And so he gets to see many different versions of what jealousy looks like, and kind of try them on himself before getting to the self-knowledge enough to be like, yes, that is what's going on. And I need to downplay it a little bit. Like he doesn't have the emotional intelligence not to be jealous in public, if you know what I mean. And so like one of the things that we see him learning is not just the ability to understand his emotions, but also the ability to know how to be socially acceptable with them. Which he's not.
Right. No, he's not at all. And interestingly, I think this episode is one where Linda and Chloe kind of model that, right? Like this is the time this is the first time they've spent time together since the very first case. When Chloe did not think very highly of Dr. Martin. And then but in this episode, there's some like reciprocal mutual regard expressed, both for how they do their jobs, but also around Lucifer, which I think is a really interesting in this episode about jealousy, right? Linda, it would make sense if Linda were jealous, right? She sees that Lucifer has an emotional attachment to Chloe that is bigger than and different than the one he has with her. But there doesn't seem to be any jealousy at all. So I think that's an interesting thing.
Want to talk about Linda. We mentioned this on an earlier episode about how like he describes himself as walking heroin, and in this episode, Maze says to her, "It doesn't end well when you're sleeping with my boss." And I think this is again where you do such a great job of kind of like tying up things, even if you don't notice them on the first watch through. When he is in her office after she has gotten all the patient files and she won't let him look at them. And he says to her, "Don't you want to help me?" And he like looks at her and there is a moment of like, oh. And it's the bringing out the desire moment And that seems like that's when she switches from wanting to sleep with him to wanting to be the best possible therapist for him. And I feel like that helps explain why she does some things that are kind of out of character later on, like busting him out of a mental institution in the second season, because she is a very intelligent person who it clearly takes her work seriously, and yet she does things that are not very smart to help Lucifer on occasion, and that kind of explains it if we take it as he has activated her desire to help him in a therapist scenario rather than have sex with him,
which she still wants to do.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I think that's, I mean, in that confession to Chloe, in that moment of confession to Chloe, when she says, I thought you were sleeping with him. And she's like, oh, I am. Mm-hmm. But I think maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah.
That there's, it's not about like an either or, it's just about which one is stronger when they can't both be
coexist.
True.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think it's also, it gives another way of it doesn't end well when he fulfills your desires. Just thinking of like what that's even when the desire is not sex, there is some fallout for Linda. But again, that's in future episodes.
Yeah. So back to this episode, both of these episodes, I think the untrustworthiness of Amenadiel, it just keeps being underscored, right? Like these like clandestine meetings in parking garages with Malcolm.
Yes.
And then the big reveal at the end of the second episode that we're talking about today, which I feel like has been hinted at, especially if you pay attention to the previously on Lucifer. They make sure to show Amenadiel say, I just need to find a thug, a pitiful thug to end you.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Can I just say, I love Malcolm as a villain. I think he's my favorite villain of the entire series. And it's because he is so enjoying himself. Like I read something somewhere, people were talking about like one of the things they miss about old movies is the villains who are just having a ball doing bad shit. And they gave the example of Ursula from The Little Mermaid. And so that's kind of how I feel about Malcolm. Like he's just enjoying the hell out of doing horrible things. And I like watching him. That actor, I think like he's chewing the scenery, but in ways where it's like he died and came back to life. The scenery chewing seems reasonable. The way he reacts to eating, like he takes a bite of a donut and he's like, oh my God, did this taste so good before I died? And the way that he kind of, he's so smarmy.
So smarmy.
That
so
wink
smarmy.
In the in Et Tu Doctor, when they are at his welcome back party, and his partner says heaven didn't want him and hell couldn't keep him. He says, you know, I have no idea, and smart and winks,
and he winks at Chloe. Yeah,
and it's so gross. And yeah, like I have trouble like figuring out why. So I'm like, oh yeah, do it more. But it's such a gross, like terrible villain. And I'm so glad when he's defeated, but I have fun watching him because I feel like Kevin Rankin, the actor, had fun playing him. And there's this undercurrent of enjoyment. And that also makes sense with his characterization too, and when later on, it's not in these two episodes, later on, you find out what happened to him in hell. It all like fits in and it's just enjoyable.
Well, later on, like in a future episode, Maze even indicates that sort of insatiable hunger is normal. It's characteristic for a soul that comes back into a physical body after having been in hell. So, but yeah, I mean, that's another one of those, we talked in a previous episode about these writers playing the long game. And I feel like at least within this season, Malcolm's characterization was part of the long game, like this, the way he's eating in these couple of episodes actually then gets explained later by what I just said. And just his behavior in general. I think they really knew precisely what effect having been to hell and come back would have on this already corrupt character before his death. So, and I think they really they gave it to us in pieces in ways that is very satisfying as a viewer.
Yeah. Speaking of the long game, Dan in these 2 episodes, the first time I watched this, when Dan and Chloe kissed in Et tu Doctor, I remember being a bit conflicted because I liked Dan so much. And I was just like, I want them together for Trixie. I like them as a family, but I really want Lucifer and Chloe together. And that they pull that rug out from under you immediately. So you find out that that Dan is the corrupt cop, and that he not only was involved in Palmetto, but he was gaslighting Chloe this entire time to protect himself. And that dynamic, like the nuance of that character, because I still, after that, I was still rooting for him, is not quite the right word, but like I between him and Malcolm, I very much wanted Dan to prevail. I very much felt like Dan was redeemable, whereas Malcolm was not. But whoo boy, that's some pretty dark stuff that he has done, and some pretty terrible stuff that he has done to come back from. And it actually underscores Father Frank's message in the second, like, there's no giving up on anyone. We are all redeemable. God has not forgotten any of us. And so that's like the undercurrent of that message with a character like Dan, who I know Kevin Alejandro has spoken in ways that he thought that Dan was not liked, and understandably, because he did some awful things.
I think that some people don't like, I mean, like the Lucifan Twitterverse, whatever, and Tumblr, not Tumblr, Reddit.
Instagram.
Reddit.
Oh, Reddit. Yes.
I have seen several folks on Reddit being like, I just don't like him. I'm watching it for the first time and I just don't like Dan. How long I have to put up with Dan? But
because
but you can't please all the people all the time.
Yeah. I really loved Dan throughout. During my first watch through, one of the things that I really appreciated about the show during my first watch through is how much I love all the regular characters, and in different ways and for different reasons. And I thought that was really, really well done. And giving this character that I had come to really like, even though like there's some real unpleasant tension between him and Chloe, which is understandable. They're separated, they're co-parenting, they're doing some things in front of their daughter that I would prefer not to see co-parents do in front of their daughter. But I really liked him. This like pulled the rug out from under me, and yet I still was able to trust him enough that he could bring himself back and be someone I could root for. And that's just amazing, particularly considering he's a corrupt cop. And again, some of this it gets into the propaganda stuff that we've talked about, and how that is, it's written for me. I'm a privileged white lady. Propaganda is written to make me feel good. But it's also very much about the story of redemption that this entire season, this entire show is, that I so appreciate. And that you can make not only mistakes, but huge, horrible mistakes and still find your way to goodness, and still be redeemable, if you put the work in.
Yes. I think that Father Frank's message at this point in the series is really relevant vis-a-vis Dan. Yeah. I think that that's part of that like long game that we're gonna See, I think it was interesting too. I don't believe that the writers knew when they wrote the Father Frank episode, but they clearly had a direction in mind that Father Frank said, how do you know the plan is that, God's plan for you, Lucifer, is over?
Is over.
Yeah. I think that I don't think, in fact, I know they didn't know specifically how 6 was gonna, eventually wrap up, but even that they had enough wherewithal for that seed to be planted that later bears fruit in season 6, I think is pretty remarkable. Just I saw an interview with the fellow who wrote this episode, and he said it actually he had to fight for it, that there were folks at the network who were like, not enough cop, not enough procedural in this, too much character.
And yet this is everyone's favorite episode of the first season.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually what that's this interview that I saw. That's what they were saying. Like Tom Ellis, Lauren German, Ildy, like everybody's like loved this episode so much. Something about there are clearly themes that resonate for the writers of this show that also resonate for me. And, it might be because we're similar generations, similar, whatever. But even the way that Father Frank, as he's dying, says, I kept asking why God put you in my path, but now I'm realizing maybe he put me in yours. Like, just that significance, the ways that we influence others without realizing it is so, there's something about it that I find really like exciting and comforting and satisfying, that notion, that we don't even know what kinds of effects we're having as we're interacting with people.
I was just thinking about this very thing yesterday. Someone I follow on Twitter was talking about how because of YouTube, she's been getting into French club music. And so there was an album that I bought when I was in France in 2000. The band was called Tété. They are, I believe, Black immigrants to France, and the album is called L'air du rien, which is Air of Nothing. And I loved that album. Like I listened to it so many times, and so I shared it with my friend on Twitter. And I was thinking, this band has no idea that some random white lady in Milwaukee loves their album and has listened to it over and over and over again and knows all the words in French. And now I was fluent-ish in French at the time, but it's not easy. Like, you know how hard it is to know the words of a song you like in English. And I was thinking, like, that's the sort of thing, like you put something out in the world and you have no idea where it's going to end up. And it's almost like a message in a bottle. And it could mean everything to the person that it ends up with, and you'll never have any way of knowing. And there's something so thrilling about that idea. I know exactly what you mean. Like the Father Frank makes a difference for Lucifer forever. And you have no way of knowing that. And that is so, I agree. It's such an exciting idea. And it's something that I have been thinking about. I also, I was talking to Joe. For those of you who don't know, I have a book coming out that I co-wrote with my friend Joe Salsihai. We were talking about our influences, and it's a book about money. And one of my influences was a Canadian murder mystery, Cozy, written in the late 70s or early 80s, that I read over and over again when I was about 11. If you probably remember it, the book with the arrow on the cover. So the Grub and Stakers Move a Mountain by Alyssa Craig.
Oh, I remember that name.
Yes. All of my one-liners come from that book, every single one of them. And the thing is, like, that author would be so confused to know that I have one-liners in a finance book coming out in 2021 based on a book that came out more than 40 years before that.
It's too funny.
It's ridiculous. So yes, I totally, that resonates with me in such an important way. And I didn't think of it that way until you said it, that like just like that. So I would love to talk about music a little bit in the Father Frank episode as well.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about
Um,
music.
yes. So obviously that's how Father Frank and Lucifer connect. um there's the Lucifer is convinced he and Frank have absolutely nothing in common, and he in fact brings him to Lux in order to embarrass him, to make him feel uncomfortable. And Frank is just like, this is home to me. I grew up in places like this. And with the scantily clad nuns, dancing in front of him, he's too busy like wrapped up in the music. And it's pop music. That's the thing that I really appreciate, is that it's modern, recent pop music. And I have trouble describing myself as someone who loves music, because in my head, there's one specific way to love music.
I hear that.
And it's only recently when I realized, like, I was thinking about how the kids might describe me. And whenever we get in the car, I put music on and I'm singing along to it. And they would say that I love music. I'm like, yeah, and they'd be right. But, I don't read it. I don't understand it. And so that was something that I really appreciated in the showing that music bridges all kinds of gaps between people. It's kind of I'm not going to say universal, but it's a language that we can speak, even if we don't speak other languages in common.
I think it also, the suggestion of this episode is that the music is real. The connections that the music forges are real connections. Like they're not superficial connections, but genuine, authentic relationship is at least initiated through shared music, which I think is also significant. It's not just like, oh, we like the same song and like that's it. They clearly, as we just got finished saying, Lucifer and Father Frank have some sort of real connection as a result of this day they spend together.
Yeah. Well, and it's, some of the stuff that we've talked about offline, and I like talk about offline that, my husband's not very interested in Lucifer. The connection that you make with other people who appreciate the same art you do is meaningful. There is meaning when you can, both appreciate something, and in Frank and Lucifer's case, create something together. They're playing together and they're creating this joyful expression of enjoyment, and the playful teasing of each other.
What's interesting is that when they realize that Chloe is there watching, they stop.
Yeah.
Which speaks to the intimacy of a connection. And I don't mean sexual, but there was something about it belonging to the two of them.
Yes.
And so when they realized there was a third there, it stopped.
They both stopped. Yes. Yeah, because it wasn't for an audience. And that's the other thing that's interesting, because music, you think of as music for an audience, you think of creating art for an audience. And sometimes it's just for yourself, or you and the person you're sharing it with. And that's also like a really interesting kind of intimacy and connection. The other thing, and some of this has to do with the fact that Father Frank is Catholic. A lot of the antecedents of Lucifer in terms of his mythos is going to be Catholic, because of just where the stories come from and how they've been changed throughout the centuries as Christianity is splintered again and again. But one of the things I get very fascinated by extremes of religion. And I can remember reading an essay by an evangelical Christian kid that he'd actually plagiarized from someone else. It was really interesting, where the entire thing was having a dream about all the sins that he'd had, and Jesus accepting all of them. And it's a window into a world I don't understand. And I find it fascinating. But the essay, one of the things that he said, and I just couldn't get over my outrage, was that like some of the sins that he had taken part in was like all of this music that he'd wasted time listening to, all of this pop music. And I just remember being like, what, why is that not okay? Why can we not experience joy? And isn't music a way of connecting with the divine? I mean, like, isn't art a way of connecting with the divine? Like, I know I'm not the only person who, upon experiencing an incredible piece of art, music, it's happened on occasion with novels, with movies, TV show, where I get goosebumps. And like, that's the closest I feel a connection to like the creator, other than when I have, if I learn a new piece of information about the age of the earth or about the size of the universe. I get the same level of goosebumps in the same sense of like, I am not alone. I mean, obviously, but there's more. We are not alone in this. There is something greater, and this is a connection to it. And so that's something I really appreciate. Is a mainstream show that is talking about Christianity, that made it clear that not only music, and it's not just music, because it could just be like the kind of music you hear in church, but all music, that pop music, that rock and roll, that any music that moves you is a connection to the divine. And I so appreciate that, particularly since I know that there is a world out there that thinks that is not true.
I don't know anything about the specific evangelical thoughts about music, so I'm not going to comment on that. But what's coming up for me is that in the Bible, there's the scene where King David, is like so ecstatic. He's singing and dancing before the Lord because he's just feeling so moved by God. And Michal, Saul's daughter, sees him and is like, yuck, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't, that is undignified. Right? Like, so what I'm grappling with is the fact that, for thousands of years, this debate about the power of music and whether or not it is appropriate has been happening.
Yes.
So throw it back to David and Michal. But also I have Leonard Cohen in my head. Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. David played a chord that pleased the Lord. Mm-hmm. But the fact that Lucifer, an angel, within the universe that the show has set up, at one point at least, God's favorite son, would be musically inclined, actually makes sense with what you're saying about the power of music, but also with the tradition in the ways that, David, who similarly was, a favored of the god of Lucifer, a favorite, was musically inclined. Hence the Psalms are meant to be, were originally songs, and were meant to be, many of them, written by King David. So I just think that's interesting. And there are other moments too, before David, Miriam and the women sing a new song on the Song of the Sea after crossing on dry land between two walls of water. So there's definitely song is, and the idea of song is very, very old, as a way to praise or engage or connect with the divine. So
I so appreciate the importance that music plays in the show as well. Listening to the soundtrack from this, I've found a whole bunch of wonderful artists I wouldn't have otherwise heard. This show is what introduced me to Nina Simone.
Really?
Which,
interesting.
Yes. I had heard of her, and I'm sure I'd heard her songs, but it was what got me to I need to look her up and listen to everything she did.
An amazing character. Yeah.
Amazing. And very so strong. And then having this particular episode where music plays such a central role in the connection between Lucifer and Frank, and their commonality, which is embodied by the music. It's like represented by the music, but their commonality is much deeper than that. Is just really exciting to me, in a way that I don't know. I feel like we don't have a whole lot of pop culture that, well, maybe we do, but that celebrates the importance of art in this way. In the same way The Good Place celebrated the importance of philosophy. um and so that's something that I think is really exciting and important, and would love to see. I mean, like, there's so many movies about making movies, and there's television shows about making television shows and things like that. This is more of a further remove. It's a television show about the importance of art. Maybe I overthunk it.
You probably did. But hey, that's what we do, right?
That's what we do. So, the other thing that I appreciate about the Father Frank storyline is that they show us another example of how to be a good person who's not perfect. He is so very good. He's a very, very good character, good person. He's doing so much to try to help Connor, the child who he feels the connection to, because they were in that car accident together. He lost his child. This child lost their parents. But he lies. He breaks the law. He fights. He hits.
He harassed the guy.
Yeah, the drug dealer,
the deceased,
the original drug dealer.
Yeah.
And he recognizes his own imperfections. And I really appreciate that example, showing us, like, because it would be very easy to make him perfect. And that's something that I think writers fall victim to. Like, we want to show how good this character is, so, like, no flaws. And Father Frank has many, even. When Chloe asks him, like, why did you break the restraining order? He's like, I answered to a higher authority. I'm like, in any other character that would really piss me off. And that's really not an okay thing to say. But we understand him to be an imperfect person trying to do good.
Yeah, I'm gonna suggest we've overthunk it enough for today.
Yeah. Do you have any final stray fluffy thoughts? I like the fluffy thoughts.
Today I think from Et tu Doctor, I appreciated, like, Chloe says, you really didn't see any similarity, and they just have an unspoken agreement. They're gonna not talk about the fact that he's jealous, because she says, no, I didn't see that, totally different, which they don't lie to one another, and yet they agree unspokenly that they're not gonna talk about this right now, which I appreciated. It made me smile on this rewatch. That'll be my closing PS.
I want my closing. I want to say, you and I talked about this, I think, offline last time we talked about the Father Frank episode. That's what Lucifer is playing when Chloe comes to check in on him, is knocking on heaven's door, which was what Father Frank played, and he was describing as a snooze fest. And I appreciate that on so many levels. I mean, which song it was that he chose, which is, it's a rock song, but very religious one in some ways, that he played it because Father Frank played it, and he was doing it for himself. He was doing it for that connection to Frank, who's now, we can hope, in the Silver City.